Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm your own Corinne. And my guest for this episode is Kate Chapman, who's the Director of Architecture at the Wikimedia Foundation, where she's been since 2018. Before that, she's had a number of interesting jobs, including serving as CTO of the nonprofit Cadasta Foundation and co-founder and executive director of the nonprofit Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, or HOT. So, Kate, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Where do you live?
I live in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. near Seattle, Washington.
Cool. Okay.
It's a long geographer description, probably, but
yeah, okay,
that's my background.
I won't ask for the coordinates, but you might have those on file. So before we get to anything else, we're talking right around the 20th birthday of Wikipedia. Do you remember when you first discovered Wikipedia?
I don't. I do remember the first time I tried to edit, I was like, oh, I already have an account. So that must have that must have happened at some point. But
oh, meaning because of your MediaWiki involvement, so like in the last 2 years?
Oh, no, I mean years ago, just because I'm Wonder Chuck all over the internet type,
I get
situation.
It. Okay.
Where I was like, you know, I had looked at it at some point and obviously made an account, but then I don't know what happened after that.
All right. The other thing I want to get to before anything else is I'm told I should ask you about goats.
And I'm not working for the Wikimedia Foundation. I do have a miniature dairy goat herd.
Yeah. And you milk the goats?
I do. Due to COVID, I haven't been milking any goats right now. It was all too much. So
I see. Okay.
I don't run a business with the goats. It's more of a hobby. So it's not like I have customers complaining if I don't have goats I'm milking or anything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But normally what would you be doing with the milk?
I like to make cheese and then just stick it in my coffee.
Oh wow, fantastic!
Dairy product type stuff.
Yeah. I not to get sidetracked, but I've heard goat milk is healthier. It's closer to human milk than cow milk. It's healthier for people, something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of, some people call it the universal milk because you can raise other animals on goat milk where you can't on cow milk.
Yeah. Okay. It's highly compatible. That's the word. Cool. So you've had quite a career already. I want to ask about the two previous jobs I mentioned at the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team and the Cadasta Foundation. First of all, the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, by the way, do you say HOT or HOT?
HOT.
Okay. So yeah, you helped to create HOT.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so I can't say it was my idea. My co-founder status is more around doing all the administrative work that's required to set up an NGO. Because HOT had been an idea in the OpenStreetMap team almost from in the OpenStreetMap community almost from its inception, that having freely available crowdsourced map data could help in a disaster. And then it didn't fully come to fruition until 2010. There were some little things before then, but the anniversary of the 2010 Haiti earthquake was this week on January 12th. And that was the point where the international community really saw the power of both free and crowdsourced information to help respond to disasters.
Yeah. I've definitely heard of OpenStreetMap. I'm guessing most people listening have. There's actually one person on this podcast who's involved in OpenStreetMap. That's a guy named Sam Wilson from Australia. So we talked about it somewhat. So you already basically covered it, but what in general does HOT do?
Yeah, and one thing I was going to mention with OpenStreetMap, I think it's funny being involved in Wikimedia and Wikipedia now, because in OpenStreetMap, we like to say we're the Wikipedia of maps.
Sure.
So then just go to the source.
Right.
But HOT helps use OpenStreetMap for humanitarian and international development reasons. Yeah. A lot of the map data in the world isn't free. You might not be able to access it, all sorts of different reasons, or it doesn't exist.
Right.
A lot of times for commercial reasons. You know, you can imagine places that are having that are really prone to disasters or an epidemic for like a humanitarian response, that there might not be that interest in having up-to-date map data there. So that's really where allowing people to edit a map together has filled that gap.
Yeah. Just hearing about it, it reminds me a little of all those organizations that have sprung up around Wikipedia to try to get people to contribute to it or use it more. There's Wiki Project Med and Wiki Education Foundation, all those. Does that sound right? That it's sort of analogous to those?
Yeah, it's similar. One of the things that's a bit different is the OpenStreetMap Foundation doesn't really pay very many people. There's a couple contractors and that's it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Versus, so when in 2010, when we incorporated HOT, we really, we were getting money to go to Haiti through another organization as individuals, but then someone wanted to donate money to us. So we ended up forming an organization because there wasn't, the OpenStreetMap Foundation wasn't going to be that organization at the time. So it was purely very, very administrative. It wasn't like this big, we're going to create a big NGO and 100 people are going to work for it, even though that's what it's become.
I see. Okay. Yeah. But in the beginning, you just needed a bank account, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds I've heard stories in Wikimedia that it was Brian Vibber needed a laptop was like the original inception. I don't know if it's true, but it feels similar.
Right. Okay. I wouldn't be totally surprised. Yeah. People sometimes make more, grandiose justifications after the fact for these things. So were you doing a lot of traveling?
Yeah, for sure. You mean during my time at HOT?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, what happened was I had a startup job at the time, like originally, and I used all my vacation time to go to Haiti. And then they even created a special Kate Chapman policy. Like, the policy didn't have my name on it, but it was, if you used your time to do humanitarian work, you could have double the vacation time.
I see. Yeah. Cause you weren't exactly going to, Acapulco or something.
Yeah. But so they, cause they were trying to keep me. And I wanted to work there, but so we were traveling and teaching people about OpenStreetMap. And then I got invited to go to Indonesia to see if we could pre-map, because we had mapped after the disaster happened in Haiti. And it became clear that I could not keep my job and do what we wanted to do in Indonesia, because it was a matter of, can you come here for 2 months? So I ended up quitting my job, moving to Indonesia, and I ended up staying there for almost 5 years. And I didn't have some big plan to move. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So you lived in Indonesia for 5 years.
Yeah. And it was just, we were seeing, could we pre-map? There's this software called InnoSafe, which does impact modeling. So it takes a scientific model of a disaster like a hurricane or a earthquake or volcanic eruption, and then you can combine that with other data to say, if this disaster happened here, this would be the impact. But at the time, they didn't have detailed road and building information to combine with that scientific model. So that was why we were there, trying to build communities to do mapping so that disaster managers could better plan.
Yeah. Okay. And when was the big tsunami there? I guess, well, maybe there's been more than one. Was that, okay.
Yeah, it was before that time, but that was a lot of the...
That was the impetus or something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Wow. How's your Indonesian? Is that the Bahasa? What is it? What's it called? Yeah, sorry.
Indonesian or Bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah.
It's a little rusty these days, but I think I could get back up.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, like moving along, I guess you were after that you were CTO of the Cadasta Foundation, which sounds like an even bigger organization. What do they do?
Well, so that organization was just starting out, so I actually joined it and hired the whole engineering team.
Oh, Cadasta! Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they're building open source software for communities to document their land rights.
Yeah. And so you're basically doing software development or project management and all that.
Yeah, running the engineering team as well as consulting with partners to see what people really needed. The thing I didn't know about land rights is there's different levels of this person or group of people own this land, and there's informal land rights where laws have come into place since then that actually give people formal rights. So it's complicated. Like in the United States, it seems very simple, but you go to other places and you may not be proving someone has 100% legal right to this land, but you might be saying, well, they've had this informal right for 20 years. Their next door neighbor says they have the right. And then maybe that's enough for them to get a loan or some other help. And so it actually was a very complex data problem because it varied from place to place so much.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, you're really, that whole project is really, changing communities' lives potentially. I mean, yeah, it's pretty heavy. I mean,
yeah. Well, and there's a lot of paper-based or systems that have been used to do it in the past. So the idea, could you speed it up by using technology?
I see. Was there a mapping component in that too? I guess there must have been.
Yeah, because you have to, know where something is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. When you talked about data, that actually brought up something interesting. On LinkedIn, I did a lot of research. You say that you believe in the mantra "people before data," which is an interesting thing to say. Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, I like to think of it as it can mean what you interpret it to mean, but a lot of times it's easy as geeks to forget about the human side of it and be focused on, look at all the cool things we can do with this data. And I think you see that a lot across the tech industry, where it's like you lose sight of the humans and why you're really doing something. And so that's all is think about what we're really trying to do first. Are we trying to improve people's lives? How does this impact them?
Okay. But I mean, in your case, it's not like there's a conflict between the two. You've been using data to help people. It seems like a through line through your career. Not that I really can sum up your career.
Yeah, like I have 20 years of experience. Like prior to Wikimedia, very focused on data focused projects. Where versus I think of a lot of the Wikimedia projects as it is data, but it's more content heavy, if that makes sense. You're not taking like the mean or median of like a section of a Wikipedia article in the sense that you might with demographic data.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess what you're saying sort of jibes with the critique a lot of people have had of Silicon Valley, well, and maybe not necessarily, but there's a critique that it's very focused on specific things, improving ad metrics and all that kind of stuff, or just fairly trivial things like, services to do your laundry for you, as opposed to the, the much bigger problems that exist around the world.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the reason I feel strongly about that is I worked for a proprietary data company when Hurricane Katrina happened, and we bought a bunch of data to essentially resell to the US government to help find people, people places to stay. But not everyone had the benefit of that data because it was, contained and allowed with specific groups. And it was really an inflection point for me where free culture and free information is clearly vital. And I didn't really want to stay on the proprietary information side of things any longer.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, this isn't directly relevant. Do you feel like the U.S. government or governments in general are getting better about dealing with open data, or supplying open data and demanding that data be freely available and all that?
Oh yeah, it's gotten much better. And I had a reputation for a while as the lady who just goes around asking for free satellite imagery. Because I would just like bug companies, and there's not that many to bug. Like there's not that many.
Right.
Like there's more now than there was then. But now it's far more freely available, at least for humanitarian uses. And for people who have gotten involved in humanitarian mapping since probably don't know that it used to be, oh yeah, we negotiated for that one picture of the area, that one satellite shot, and it took way too long.
Oh yeah.
It's instantly available. And a lot of that's been government help, and also commercial enterprises realizing that, that raw data isn't their main value. It's what's on top of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I just read something recently that OpenStreetMap is now becoming a big thing for commercial uses. Like Apple is starting to use it and all these kinds of, things like that.
Yeah, that's been going on for a while.
Okay.
But it's become far more apparent, if that makes sense. Like it's been a slow path. But if you look at it, like Google has a tremendous mapping platform and tremendous amount of mapping information, and then none of the other large tech companies like Apple, for example, have the equivalent. So if they band together, they can more effectively compete with Google.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Another kind of random question before we get to the Wikimedia stuff. What do you think the big needs are today as far as software for humanitarian purposes? Do you have any ideas? It's still mapping stuff? Is there any one area where there's a real lack?
I would say just making it easier and easier for people to add information. It's certainly gotten easier over time. You no longer have to hand out GPS units to everyone. Like you can hand out.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it's a lot better, but in my mind, the end, like in OpenStreetMap, if you're making a free map of the entire world, it should be made by the people living in that world, but it's not universally possible for people to add and get use from that, just depending on their situation or background or language. There's a lot of barriers still. I think to really get there, people are able to map their own communities.
Yeah. So the Wikimedia Foundation, where you are now, how did you end up there after all of that other stuff?
Well, so free culture is fundamentally important to me. So it was important to work for a values aligned organization.
Yeah.
And working for an organization that supports one of the most trafficked websites in the world, that's also really exciting. There's not very many places you can do both of those things.
Yeah, sure. It might be the only one in the top, definitely in the top 10 websites, maybe in the top, I don't even know. I was going to say top 50, but Fandom is probably in there. Top 20. Yeah, so you're head of the architecture team there. One person in your group has actually been on the show already, Alexandra Pasculin, although we talked more about documentation when she was here. Have you met any of your team in person yet, by the way?
I've actually met all of my team in person.
Oh, cool.
Which is more than many people can say right now, for sure.
Right. Yeah, okay.
My Diana Monte-Leon on my team, I met in person at the last place I traveled before everything stopped last February. She wasn't staff at the Wikimedia Foundation yet.
Oh, wow. So. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's quite a coincidence. So this might be hard to give a nice compact answer to, but what does the architecture team do?
So we're holistically looking at our socio-technical systems, like how both the software components and the humans work together to deliver content and user experiences. And you're right, it's hard to be succinct about it. But so there's 20 years of history of delivering Wikipedia.
Sure.
And to be able to reach that dream of free knowledge for everyone, like we need to change how our systems work. So looking at how does everything hook together, what parts are working now, what parts need to change, what are people really trying to do? Really that holistic systems thinking approach.
Yeah. So is it more about decision making or about, creating processes to do decision making?
So I've been working on decision making, but that's less about architecture and more about, it 100% has to do with architecture, but improving our decision making processes so they can be more timely and more inclusive was really important to me. I originally came into the Wikimedia Foundation working with TechCom, and actually as a vendor, very part-time. So I spent a lot of time looking at, and for those who might not be familiar, TechCom is a committee that makes cross-cutting technical decisions. And so I've spent the past 3 years working with them. And as I look at it as we have to scale our technical systems, we also have to scale our human systems. And it's not just the Wikimedia Foundation, but if you look at the organization, purely the organization, it's almost 500 people now, or maybe It is 500 people.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, the same processes that worked when it was 50 people won't necessarily work with 500. So figuring out how to make decision-making work more smoothly. And then the architecture team will have important decisions we need to get input on and use that process. But it was something I specifically was working on and less something the team was working on.
Okay, because you were part of TechCom.
Yeah, I had been facilitating TechCom for a few years.
Yeah, okay. And that's short for technical committee, communications committee.
Technical committee.
Yeah, okay. And they used to be known as ArchCom. Is that correct?
Before my time, but yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Which is architecture committee. Yeah, it's not. When I think of the word architecture, I think of designing. Software architecture. I think of designing classes and all that kind of stuff. But what you're talking about is more general, broader than that.
Yeah, so I view software and system architecture relate to each other, but like in the software architecture, you would be looking at a specific software component. I like to look at it from like a building architecture perspective, where the architect would design the whole building, but you need a kitchen, for example, and how do you just and so software architecture would be more like, what's the kitchen look like? How does that work?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the more general thing is I don't know, what should the style of this building be like, or that's the kind of thing that you're trying to help facilitate.
what are the high level patterns?
Okay, I see.
How should things talk to each other? How should things flow through the system?
Yeah. Is there an example of a decision that has been, brought to from beginning to conclusion, or at least to conclusion through this new process that you've set up or you're setting up?
We've done a pilot around some decisions around implement. There was a decision to use Vue.js to switch to a modern JavaScript framework, and so there was a pilot run around a decision around that. I was trying to think of what it was basically around whether or not a build step was needed in for the initial work, the initial pilot of using Vue. So that was done as a test, but the new process is just getting started now.
Yeah. Okay. There's a methodology for software called Scrum. I'm guessing most people listening to this podcast have at least heard of. In my case, that's pretty much from the extent of my understanding is I've heard of it. I mean, I sort of understand the concept, but anyway, I'm not going to define it here, but I believe the Wikimedia Foundation follows it, at least to some extent. How relevant is that to what you're doing?
I would say there's different agile methodologies that different teams use. I don't know if my team wouldn't necessarily say, well, I wouldn't say we're doing Scrum and that we follow it to the letter, but we do 2-week sprints, we do planning, we do retrospectives, we estimate our work. So we definitely try to work in small iterative cycles where we can.
Oh yeah, well, okay, you follow Scrum for your own work, but are you trying to enforce? Or I guess we had a previous episode where the word enforce was frowned upon. Actually, the one with Alexandra, they were talking about how they can't really enforce anything, the documentation people. But yeah, I mean, enforce or encourage people to use Scrum, or is that not really in your control?
Not really in my purview. I would say I do encourage
or agile methodologies in general.
Iterative work for sure. Because I just think, there's so many unknowns when you do software development that you can't possibly plan everything out ahead of time. So methods where you're doing small pieces of work and saying, okay, did that work? Do we need to change things? And then rinse and repeat, I think is important. Is an important way to work together.
Yeah. The whole decision-making process at the Wikimedia Foundation within MediaWiki, that's come up on this podcast quite a few times. Just in terms of the difficulty of making decisions because of all the number of so-called stakeholders involved, both people who work for the Wikimedia Foundation and then outside volunteer MediaWiki developers and just Wikipedia users who ultimately can after a year's effort can say, well, we don't like it, and then you never hear about that project again or something. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Is part of what you're working on to make it easier to make decisions or faster even, or is that just the nature of working on something that's this broad and open?
Definitely trying to make it easier and more predictable to make decisions, and I think the two things that are the hardest is, one, a lot of times I see when people are trying to make decisions, they're talking about completely different things. So start with, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And let's make sure we're talking about the same problem.
Right.
And then who are the stakeholders who need to be involved, and being very explicit about that. So that people don't get missed or left out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, well, do you think that this process that you're putting in place will help make decision making faster? I mean, even if it doesn't, it's not necessarily bad if it's at least, more reliable or more comprehensive. But could it make things faster?
My hope is it'll make it faster, but I think in my experience, a lot of times, just things being predictable is enough, and then often what the decision is doesn't even matter that much. I mean, sometimes, of course, it does, but clearly knowing what the decision is can help a lot because that gives you something to react to, and go with.
Yeah.
I spent the past year studying decision making as part of this and looking at what other organizations do, and also reading books. A group of us took a 12-week course on decision making, just to like the components of what makes effective decision making. There's a lot of management science behind that, so that we weren't just making something up without some research. Because everyone's made a decision before, so it's one of those things where it's like, well, everyone makes decisions. We can figure out a process, but But I think looking outside is important. Learning from others.
Yeah. I guess the whole like GitLab imbroglio is sort of an example of that. I don't know. We talked about Grant Ingersoll was on here, and he talked about that. That he didn't fully understand the process when he had to make that decision or something. So right. So it's not that he made the wrong decision. He just went about it the wrong way, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, people want to be heard and have their ideas considered, and sometimes, with as large as a complex ecosystem as we have, there's no way you're going to please everyone, but you have to consider those stakeholders, because there's situations where, like the GitLab situation, there's a huge cost in the infrastructure we run, and there's reasons for doing it for sure, but our current setup, our release engineering team, it was a huge burden for them to continue doing it the way we were doing it.
Yeah. Well, I guess well, things are moving from Garrett to GitLab now, so it's turned out well in the end. Are there any moving to the actual decisions being made? I guess, are there any upcoming features you're excited about? I mean, do you are you allowed to have opinions as to the specific features and priorities and all that, as someone just overseeing the process?
Well, I wouldn't come to work every day if I wasn't excited about what we were doing.
It's fair. Sure.
And and I don't know so much about specific features coming out, but the 2030 movement strategy really excites me. I was on the product and technology working group for that, because I think improving our user experience and making things more inclusive is just fundamental, really, to free knowledge for everyone, and so that excites me. Like the bigger broader promises of doing that.
Yeah, cool. So I guess you're not actually doing day-to-day software development anymore.
It's been a while.
Yeah. I mean, is there any chance you'll go back to that, or is it always a one? It seems to always be a one-way path. Once you move into management or anything, people don't go back to regular coding.
So the point where I didn't totally stop doing software development, but I was on a team and I was a platform engineer, and our API documentation was terrible, and and there weren't any examples or anything. And so I ended up becoming a developer advocate simply because there was this huge gap. And then I was like, oh, I actually like spending more of my time working with others. Not software development is very collaborative, but I mean more of my time interacting with others in a synchronous way.
Yeah, sure.
And so that was really a change. I mean, I started programming when I was 10, so it's something I've done for a long time, but I didn't really, I think despite how long I'd worked as a software engineer and everything, it didn't really occur to me that I was much happier thinking about the people side of things more.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I feel like that's inevitable. I don't know. You don't meet too many, too many developers in their 60s or something. So I feel like everyone moves out of it. Maybe that's just because there wasn't that much, there weren't that many developers, 40 years ago. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, there's definitely, like, I know people who were, retired and they were still, I mean,
yeah,
it comes up to like, what does a principal or a distinguished engineer do? What's their daily life look like though?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about anyway. Do I want to keep spending time debugging it? Not sure actually. I think that's it for my questions. Yeah. Well, just a random question. Actually, this doesn't really tie into anything. It's something I've been thinking about. If you had to rewrite MediaWiki in any language or any setup, and you didn't have access to the original source code, so the fact that it's currently in PHP didn't help at all. Do you have any preference? Do you have any thoughts on what would be your ideal approach?
Never thought about it that way, because one of the biggest challenges we have with MediaWiki is we're delivering like a top 10 website, and it's this wiki for all these other things.
Sure.
So I would be more tempted, and this is less about language, to try to split that if you're rewriting it, because there's similarities in the problems, but you could solve each problem a lot better if you solve them separately, I think.
That's very interesting. So there'd be two MediaWikis, you're saying?
Yeah, or would it make sense to build like collaborative encyclopedia software, and then there's of course all these other use cases for wikis?
Sure. Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. It's an intriguing answer. Cool. Yeah, I think that's it. That's a sufficiently thought-provoking way to end the interview. So yeah, Kate, it was great talking to you, and thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.